Hello, this is Harry Reasoner. Happy Tuesday. A little while ago, I was watching some videos by a user named Born Without Religion, and I would recommend her to you. Check her out. She's quirky and eccentric, obviously intelligent, and very funny. And I haven't watched all of her videos yet, but I have a feeling I'm going to. Anyway, check her out, Born Without Religion. And I commented recently on one of them. It was a video in which she was talking about gender and sexual preference and that sort of thing. And I made a comment. I'm not even going to bother looking it up, but in the comment I used the expression, the N Dimensional Hypersphere. And I got a reply from her asking me what that meant. And I'm not surprised at all that you didn't understand what it meant, and I wouldn't be surprised if all of you didn't understand what I meant. I've used that expression many times over the years with people, and never once have I not had to explain what I meant. I first heard the expression when I was in university so long ago, and I thought it was babble, and it had no meaning to me until it was explained. And this video, I was going to type just a message to Born Without Religion, but I thought I would describe it because I find it an interesting concept that I think is relevant to some of the things I've talked about and some of the things that she has talked about. So here we go, the explanation. Okay, in some of the previous times that I tried to explain it, I did a poor job at it, but I'm going to try my best. I don't know who coined the expression, but where I first came across it was in the study of ecology, and and I guess evolutionary theory as well, in a certain way. And it was the idea or the definition of a niche, along with the concept or the idea or the proposition that no two species can occupy the same niche. Naturally, one would outcompete the other. There's a certain circularity in that, but let's keep going. And the idea was that if you were to come across two species in nature that appeared to occupy the same niche, well, you would have to look at them more closely. Now, a species, or two species, let's say, have a natural variation within the members of their population, and also those two species differ from each other. But if you were to graph it, let's say, and each axis was a certain spectrum with regards to a single characteristic. Let's take the example in birds, let's say. Here's a spectrum of beak length, let's say. Now naturally each species would have a variation or a spread somewhere along that spectrum somewhere. And another species may have that same spread or may be located somewhere on that spectrum elsewhere. But species aren't composed of a single characteristic. So we could drop in another axis at 90 degrees, so we have a two-dimensional construction now. And that second axis could represent another characteristic like average number of eggs in the clutch, let's say. And on, we'll add a third axis. We have a three-dimensional graph now, or construction, I guess you'd say. But again, species are composed of far greater numbers of characteristics than three. And we can't physically represent if we add another axis, and another, and another, and another. The construction becomes a hypersphere with n dimensions, n being the number of characteristics that we would wish to quantify and plot. And a real-life example, just quickly, and I know I always end up saying this, but it's true, I'm babbling. A good example in the bird world was that there were some species found, and I haven't looked up the reference, but it doesn't matter. It's just for demonstration, who appeared to be occupying the same niche in all regards. They had the same body size. They fed at the same time each day. Their breeding season started at the same time. They had the same coloring, etc., etc., etc. There are actually a number of species. But when they were actually observed more closely, they were found to differ in the regions vertically of the trees where they fed on insects. Certain species fed on lower branches. Some fed on just the outward tips. Some fed at the peak of the tree, etc. And in this way, they differed. When you construct that N dimensional hypervolume, you recognize that those birds do not occupy the same niche. Now, what is interesting about it to me, and where it's relevant, is that if we take humans and construct that, or actually really all of life on Earth, we recognize that we're all somewhere. And it's continuous. And whereas the concept was raised, at least to the best of my knowledge, in ecological theory to explain differences and variations that would allow species to coexist, it's fascinating to me that despite the fact that it would be used that way to discuss differences, it actually is a great unifying structure. Because when we think about it, to me, if you stop and really think about it, it completely renders obsolete such concepts as race and perhaps even species. There is just life. There's a oneness. Sure, it is made up of individuals, but individuals so intimately linked and related to one another. And of course, in the example of humans, we could add so many axes that were related to cultural phenomena, religious, etc. And we would find that we're all in the same boat together. It's something to think about. And I'd like to stress again that sure, there are regions of this n-dimensional hypervolume, but it's all just a big hypersphere. And rather than being divisive, it's really quite unifying. Let me know what you think, and I hope I explained it properly. This is Harry Reasoner. Have a good night.